Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for being here for the special meeting of the Water Commission, November 12, 2020. So we'll have the call to order, and then if you can proceed to the roll call, please.
Yes. Chair Keller?
Yes.
Vice Chair Kilborn?
Here.
Commissioner Davis?
Here.
Commissioner Young?
Here.
And Council Liaison Snedden? Present. Perfect, thank you.
Okay, thank you, everybody. So, Mr. Heckmark, are there any changes to the agenda?
There are no changes to the agenda, Chair Keller.
Thank you. Do we have any public comment?
Chair Keller, we do not have public comment at this time.
Okay, great, thank you very much. So we're going to proceed with this first part of discussion and presentation, really, of the Enhanced Urban Water Management Plan. This is session 1 of 2. And so we're going to have a very extensive presentation of what this is. So Mr. Heckmark, if you can go ahead and give the presentation.
Yes, Chair Keller, Commissioners, really excited to be here today to kick off this first work session. As you know, we've been working on this effort for over a year and really gotten into it with bringing our consultant on board in March, and have been working throughout the pandemic, outreaching with our Water Vision stakeholder groups and public engagement in October. And we're finally here today, kind of getting to kind of the apex of this important update of our long-range planning efforts. And so with that, next slide. Kind of just a little bit of a recap. Our vision for this enhanced urban water management is to provide a long-term water security for the city of Santa Barbara by preparing a water supply plan that is equitable, fiscally and environmentally responsible, and adaptable to future conditions. And of course, builds on the city's legacy of effective water management. In that vision, we have objectives that we also, of course, wanted to achieve. And of course, define as a diverse, reliable, and resilient water supply portfolio that provides a safe drinking water for the entire community is a high goal, a goal that we set out to achieve with this vision. And there has been a lot of meetings leading up to this, obviously, and I kind of wanted to just set the stage that this is kind of the beginning of those. Now that we've gotten all these technical information kind of compiled based on the information we've heard from the community, now's the time to start digging into that. And as you've over the last week got a chance to kind of dig in, there's a lot of material, and so we're not looking to rush anybody through this. We do have an objective to have 2 back-to-back meetings with the Water Commission this month. We're going to be meeting with City Council in December to talk about this information as well. And then we're going to come back again in January and February to hopefully at that time start to work to finalize it, because we do have to put this all together in a final report that we give to the state by July of 2021. That's our deadline that we're working on. But as part of this objective, we've really tried to conduct an open and transparent stakeholder process. And I think we've achieved that. We're going to walk you through kind of a summary of what has been done to date. And you know, I think a core objective of this is, as well as has been an adaptive roadmap. Certainly we're planning out for the next 30 years of growth in our community, and how we're going to deal with sea level rise and climate change, and you know, whatever else nature has to throw our way. And to that end, it needs to be adaptable. And I think that as we get through this plan and we work through the issues, I hope that that is a core fundamental aspect of this plan, is that it provides us options in the future depending on what our needs are. Next slide. With that, I'd like to turn this presentation over to Dakota Corey, the water supply analyst for the city. Thanks.
Thank you, Joshua.
So to provide an overview of our presentation today, I just wanted to let you know that we're going to work through about 50 slides. But we've built into this presentation today, we really want it to be kind of an interactive work session rather than just talking head presentation. And so we've worked into the presentation several points where we'll pause and ask for commissioner feedback and any questions or concerns you might have. So kind of an outline of the presentation for today, I'm going to give a brief update on our stakeholder engagement process, and then I'll turn the presentation over to Jeff Seitel from Water Systems Consulting, and he's going to present a recap of our existing portfolio analysis, which we presented to you in July. And from there, both Jeff and Rob Morrow, also from Water Systems Consulting, will provide an update on the work we've done on the future portfolio development. And that's really going to be the meat of our presentation today. Again, this is part 1 of 2, so we'll come back to you next week. And next week, we'll actually present the details of our triple bottom line analysis, but we'd like to provide a short preview of that analysis today so you can kind of see where we're headed. Finally, we're going to have plenty of time for commission feedback and questions and answers. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned earlier, we've built into the presentation several opportunities to listen to your concerns and questions and receive feedback. And so these are the different topics that we'll pause as we're done with and receive that feedback. So when I'm finished with the stakeholder engagement update, we'll take a break. And then also at the end of the existing portfolio analysis recap, the future portfolio development approach, the future portfolio characterization, and our preliminary recommendations. Next slide, please. So this slide provides an overview of the project schedule, and I know that you've seen it before, but I'll just help you orient a little bit. We have updated it a bit. On the upper third of the slide, you'll see that there are several circles. They're blue, green, and orange. The blue circles with the CC in them represent when we're presenting this project to City Council. The green circles with WC represent Water Commission presentations, and the orange circles with the CSG in them represent when we're working with our citizen stakeholder group. And so you can see the orange triangle in the middle of the slide that says we are here. So currently we are coming out of October, which is Water Vision Month, and we are doing our 2 presentations to Water Commission on the future portfolio analysis. And as Joshua mentioned, we will be going to council in December. We'll also have our 5th and final citizen stakeholder group meeting. And at that meeting, we'll also be presenting the findings of our future portfolio analysis to that group to receive their feedback. Also, as Joshua mentioned, we will be back in January and February. And so we recognize that we're providing a lot of information in the next 2 weeks, and we want to give you a chance to really mull it over, talk to your colleagues, and if you have additional feedback or questions that you'd like to present to us, we'll have another opportunity in January before we go back to council in February. And also, if you look at the lower right-hand side of the slide, you can see what Joshua mentioned, that once we've completed those January and February commission and council meetings, that's when we're really going to be doing the busy work of putting together the report so that it meets Department of Water Resources requirements for their water management plan. So that's when we'll be putting that document together. Finally, in May of 2021, we'll be back to council for a hearing on the urban water management plan and adoption in June 2021. Next slide, please. So I'd like to give the group an update on our stakeholder engagement process. We've been providing updates over the last several months. We first presented our stakeholder engagement plan at the April Water Commission meeting. And our most recent outreach effort with our community was Water Vision Month, which was the month of October. And so I'm going to provide some updates on what we've done with our stakeholder group and also some statistics from our Water Vision Month. Next slide, please. You've also seen this slide before. It provides an overview of all of the opportunities that we've provided to engage with the public. As Joshua mentioned, we've wanted this process to be open and transparent from the beginning, and we've really targeted 4 opportunities for public engagement. We have our Water Vision Santa Barbara stakeholder group, which is now met 4 times, and to really kind of take a deep dive on issues surrounding water and water supply in the community. We also meet at Water Commission and Council periodically, which are public meetings, and the public is welcome to attend and provide comments. And then finally, in October, it was Water Vision Month, and that was really designed in these strange times where we had to go totally virtual to interact with anyone that was interested in the project in the general public. And I'll, in a minute, describe in more detail all the different methods that we reached out to the public with. Next slide, please. So this is one of the outcomes from working with our Water Vision Santa Barbara stakeholder group. We developed these 5 pillars after our first 3 stakeholder group meetings. And really the idea here was to synthesize and really clearly define the most important values around water supply in our community. And these pillars were designed through the stakeholder group process and refined by them as well. Now I'll just go ahead and read through them because they really are foundational to this project. So the first pillar is that the cost of water is affordable, equitable, and just. The second is access to water is reliable and resilient. The third is the impact of our water decisions on the environment and community members is minimized. Number 4 is the community's water is valued and conserved. And number 5 is our water decisions responsibly support quality of life. And what I hope that you'll see in today's presentation and also our presentation next week is we've really taken these values that we've heard clearly from the community and we've integrated them into our entire analytical process. And so you'll see the themed future portfolios that Jeff and Rob are going to describe directly answer to these 5 pillars. That's how we designed the themes. And also when we talk about the triple bottom line analysis next week, you'll see that many of our triple bottom line criteria also directly answer to these 5 pillars that we've heard from our community. Next slide, please. So here I want to take a minute to talk about our Water Vision Month, which was the month of October. We had 3 different opportunities, or 3 different types of opportunities to engage with the public around water supply issues in Santa Barbara. The first was a series of informational videos that people could watch at their own leisure and time. They were recorded in both Spanish and English. That was a big message we heard from our stakeholder group, that we need to have our information accessible in both languages in our community. We also had a series the first week of October of Lunch and Learn presentations. These were held by staff members from the city, where we really tried to take a deep dive into some of the topics that seemed of most interest or most importance from our stakeholder group. Finally, our third opportunity for engagement was a social pinpoint board. And you can imagine social pinpoint as kind of a large whiteboard with all kinds of different colored sticky notes that you could place on that whiteboard, where people can express their ideas, their concerns, their thoughts around water supply or water in Santa Barbara. And then it is a social media site, so people are allowed to like people's pins on the board. They can provide comments and have some dialogue back and forth. And so that was another opportunity that we presented to our customers so that they could engage with us on this project. All of those 3 opportunities were presented in both Spanish and English. Next slide, please. This slide provides an overview of the different outreach opportunities we had at our disposal as city staff to get the word out about Water Vision Month. So this is really the effort we put in to drive people to participate in this month. And you can see in the left-hand column that we had several outreach opportunities available to us. We did media releases in both Spanish and English throughout the month of October. We used our city news and brief email newsletter to advertise about Water Vision Month, and that occurred in September and October. We also have a water resources e-newsletter, a library e-newsletter, and then we also provided bill inserts in the October water bills, all driving people to our Water Vision Month activities. Finally, we took advantage of our social media accounts, and we had Facebook ads for the month of October. And then the city's various Facebook sites had posts encouraging people to participate throughout the month of October. And if you look in the right-hand column of this slide, you can see the general reach that each of these media opportunities provides to our customers. So these aren't necessarily the number of customers that specifically engaged with our Water Vision Month advertising, but it is the reach of each of these opportunities. And you can see that these went out to tens of thousands of people. Next slide, please. So this slide provides an overview of our engagement on our videos. And on the bottom row of the slide, you can see that we created 4 videos that were really specific to the water supply planning effort, with topics such as the risks and uncertainties facing our water supply, which was one of our most viewed videos, and why our community needs a water vision. You can also see that we provided 3 videos that focus on specific water supplies available to the city, including the State Water Project, the desalination plant, and Gibraltar Reservoir. And you can see that by far, desalination was the video that people were most interested in viewing, but we did get pretty good viewing throughout the site. Next slide, please. This slide summarizes engagement with our social pinpoint site and our lunch and learns. And so on the left-hand side, we focus on our social pinpoint site. You can see that we had a total of 514 total visits of 144 unique users. And on average, they spent a little over a minute on the site. And that probably seems pretty appropriate considering it's really a social media site. So if you're thinking about sort of flipping through Facebook, you know, your level of engagement is relatively short. There's a word cloud in the lower left-hand corner that shows some of the most used words on the social pinpoint site. And then in the middle of the slide, it shows the category totals. So there were various categories that people could engage under, including what I value most, top concerns or questions, and ideas and suggestions. And you'll see that the green ideas and suggestions was the most popular topic that people engaged in our social media or our social pinpoint site. Finally, our lunch and learn presentations were presented by city staff. And you can see that the topic that our customers were most interested in is where our water comes from, with 22 unique registrants. Excuse me. Our residents were also interested in the methods to optimize water resilience and reliability. And I can tell you as a presenter at these lunch and learn presentations, while the number of participants might have been a little bit on the small side, the questions we had were great, and we were very engaged. There was some great question and backing and forth with these lunch and learn topics. And staff really thought there was some value in doing these, and that it might be a good tool to also use in the future as we want to engage with our city water customers. Next slide, please. So at this point, this is one of those built-in pause points. I want to take a minute to see if anybody has any questions about our stakeholder engagement process or the update that I just provided. Councilmember Sneddon?
Thank you. Not a question, but just a comment on, I just think so many public engagement efforts by the city. This one is so impressive and thorough. I just can't say it enough how appreciative I am for how broad and thorough and really with a mind for equity that you approach this with. So just feedback on that. It's just really, really impressive, and thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.
All right, if we don't have any other questions, I'm gonna go ahead and hand the presentation over to Jeff Seitel, and he is going to give a recap on our existing portfolio analysis.
Good afternoon, commissioners. Thanks, Dakota. So I'll be walking through our existing portfolio analysis and then introduce the topic of our future portfolios. So with that, let's get going here. Let's see, make sure I can, there we go. So what's shown here is an overview of our technical process that we went through for Water Vision Santa Barbara. Across the top, you can see the Water Commission meetings. We're on number 3 here, future portfolio development. But we went through planning basis back in April and discussed the existing portfolio analysis in July. And then when we come back next week, as Dakota and Joshua mentioned, we'll be digging more into the future portfolio evaluation, and then in January, presenting the adaptive implementation plan. And as Dakota described throughout the entire timeline of the project, we've been seeking public and stakeholder communications and engagement so that information can feed our analysis at every step of the way. So here's a quick summary of the conclusions from the existing portfolio analysis. And again, this hopefully isn't new information. We had covered it at the last commission meeting, but I'll go back through it here just as a recap. The biggest challenge the city faces with your existing supplies is meeting your demands during extended drought. And fortunately, the city has invested in desalination. It's a critical supply, especially during drought. But the same goes for groundwater and state water project, including supplemental water. All of those supplies are essential for the city to meet demands during an extended drought. The biggest opportunity that the city faces is maximizing the value of your available water supply during normal and wet periods. During those normal and wet periods, the city has available supply that the city is not putting to use. So how can the city take advantage of those supplies through various programs? That's really the biggest opportunity. Additional conclusions is that there is really no gap in supply versus demand with existing supplies and demands. But as demands grow or impacts the risks that impact your supply availability, then there does emerge a gap. And that's part of what this project is working to address, is how to fill that gap as demands increase and or as your existing supplies become impacted by some of the risks that we identified. And speaking to those risks, some of the largest supply planning variables that the city will need to adapt to include, probably the biggest variable is how will your customers respond after the drought? So your customers went through a process of extraordinary conservation, and those demands have not yet rebounded to the full level that they were pre-drought. So one big question is, to what extent will those demands rebound? Additionally, there are risks to your existing water supplies that are incremental, like climate change, and that could reduce water supply reliability, both for your imported supplies as well as your local surface water. And then there could be immediate or more catastrophic reductions in existing supplies. Regulatory actions and or natural disasters can affect the immediate availability of supplies. So those are some of the biggest variables that we're thinking about as we move forward into this planning process. So from the existing portfolio analysis and leading into the future portfolio analysis, we developed a set of recommendations that's really universal, regardless of which portfolio the city proceeds with. And I'll walk through them here. So the first is conservation, and that recommendation is to implement the city's water conservation strategic plan and track that post-drought demand rebound. So really keep a close eye on customer demands and implement the selected alternative in the conservation strategic plan. For the Kachuma project, it's critical that the city preserve the ability to store carryover water in the lake, and ideally the ability to store non-project water in that lake is a big benefit for the city, and it's a critical effort regardless of what direction the city proceeds in terms of your future water supply portfolio. As Joshua mentioned, Gibraltar Reservoir, it's important that the city obtain a WARN Act contract from the Bureau for pass-through water from Gibraltar to Kachuma. And then for groundwater, we recommend that the city update your sustainable yield and drought storage estimates from the work that USGS did previously. And then once those numbers are developed, prepare an annual report so that the city can track how the basin is recovering from a drought, how operations practices from the city's groundwater production system affects groundwater levels, water quality. Those types of key indicators of the health of the groundwater basin should be cataloged and reported annually. So there's clear visibility on the health of your groundwater basin, and then ultimately consider preparing a groundwater sustainability plan. As for the State Water Project, there's a key opportunity that's coming up through CCWA, where CCWA is looking at what they're calling water management strategies within their system to better utilize the available supplies within the system, looking at options like groundwater banking, storage, transfers, and exchanges. And we think it's important that the city play an active role in those discussions, because you have such a significant asset in state water, and that effort will help define what options the city has for using that asset long term. For recycled water, the non-potable recycled water, we recommend that the city update your non-potable recycled water planning that was originally done in 2009, and to take into account change conditions, change demand, evaluate the non-potable system in the context of potable reuse. So that's an update that we recommend the city pursue. And then potable reuse, the planning, we recommend that planning be updated as conditions change. So as the regulatory conditions change, as the city's water supply conditions change, and potable reuse becomes considered in the future, we recommend that planning be reevaluated to make sure that the city has a clear view for what that potable reuse project would look like. So with that, we'll pause for some feedback. I'm open to and happy to take any questions that you have.
Let me get my mic, Mr. Chair.
Yes, please, Mr. Davis, Commissioner Davis.
Okay. Okay, I'm sorry. Going through thank you for that, Jeff. Looking through the recommendation for other portfolios, all those recommendations obviously make great sense. Pass-through agreement, just a comment. I came in on this movie back in the 90s. It was part of that discussion. So I love the goal, and I'm still waiting. My main question has to do with the storage at Kachuma. And again, that's maybe for staff or you. Something in my mind tells me that there's been discussions of cutting back on allowing storage over a period of time of lake water as well as state water. And in the risk analysis, and I can't remember the tables, I have the tables written down here, you show that as a low risk. But in your presentation, you kind of said like it could be really significant if in fact they start basically cutting back on our allocations and our ability to store. So I was just wanted to get a little bit more background as to what is the risk factor on either, again, obviously they're gonna, with the biological opinion, the allocations may change, but also is there a discussion of basically changing the rules on storage? And is that set by the Bureau, or is that something that COMB basically has at least some control over? And what's our ability to influence that?
Thank you. I'll take that. Chair Keller, Commissioner Davis. Great question. You're really kind of setting me up on this one, because going out in your packet for next Thursday in the Water Commission meeting is an extensive write-up on exactly what's kind of this discussion that's been going on with USBR. We had hoped that this issue of carryover and limiting the amount of carryover in the lake was going to be something that USBR was going to back down on, because it made no sense and they provided no means or reason for doing it. But that did not end that way. And so what we're proposing to do next week is kind of present you with all of the written exchanges of information back and forth, because I believe we are going to need to ramp up our political game when it comes to the Bureau's, I just believe, outdated mindset that carryover is not a good use of storage or use of the reservoir, which is ridiculous. And that's how quickly things are changing. And, we have WSC following us. When we started this effort, and back in June, this was a non-issue and has really come out of nowhere and become a hot topic in the last 3 months. And so that's been evolving. And I think we need to make sure with this update of our long-range plan that it's clear not only to our customers, but to our electeds, that changes in the 70-year-old plan of storing excess water in the lake as a positive needs to continue. And I think we're going to need everybody getting behind this one, because it's just it's ridiculous, to be honest with you. But
Yeah, and I had that sense from just what I could feel in the air. And so again, in terms of the report, it's listed, I think, as a low risk in the tables in the chart. Sure seems as if it has deep ramifications about our future use of Cachuma. So that's just a comment more
Thank you.
than anything else.
Mhm.
I like the new water shortage stages. I like the goal basically of the actually, I'm getting into the next section. Never mind. I'll wait for that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? I think it's quite clear, but thank you very much for the presentation so far. Okay, please go ahead.
Okay, great. We will continue then. So now I'm going to talk a bit about the future portfolio development. And just to sort of kick us off here, there were a bunch of attachments included with part 1 of the future portfolio analysis TM. And I wanted to make sure to highlight those attachments there. They form a critical foundation for our analysis. And there are a series of tech memos. So we included a tech memo that outlined the communications and engagement summary, the steps that were involved in the communications and engagement process. There were some of the results from that process, as Dakota laid out earlier in the presentation. There's the demand projections TM, which we covered with you previously. The water supply and climate change analysis for Lake Cachuma, also an important piece of work. And then the groundwater management recommendations, as I summarized here in this presentation. There was a separate TM for that. The State Water Project exchange and storage options, good information on the city's options for state water. And then the cost basis TM, which lays out how we approach the cost comparisons, the comparative cost estimates included within Water Vision Santa Barbara. So the next step was to develop future portfolios. And the starting place for that was your baseline. So what is the status quo for the city currently? And that's portfolio number 1. So no changes from the status quo in terms of your supply, and then the baseline demand projection. Portfolio 2 was really just another look at the baseline. So not changing the existing supplies, just changing the way those supplies are prioritized to try to maximize storage of water in Cachuma in the form of carryover storage. So then the next step we wanted to go is we wanted to develop some thematic portfolios. And Dakota mentioned this briefly earlier. The idea here is to really listen to the community and understand what the community values in terms of your water future. And then to capture those values in themes that we could use to develop portfolios that reflect those values. So the values that came out and the pillars that Dakota mentioned really drove the description of these values, but were maximize reliability, minimize cost, minimize environmental impacts, and maximize local control. So those themes were the basis for us forming portfolios 3, 4, 5, and 6. And then as we dove into the analysis and we were working with these thematic portfolios, we realized there might be opportunities to further optimize that trade-off between cost and reliability. And we developed 3 additional portfolios to consider. Portfolio 7 is focused on potable reuse. Portfolio 8 is focused on expansion of desal, and Portfolio 9, which is expanding desal and prioritizing desal, again, to try to maximize the amount of carryover storage in Cachuma. So this shows a bit more detail. So the baseline portfolios are there on the left. The maximize reliability portfolio number 3 incorporates potable reuse, and it prioritizes desal and state project water over Cachuma. And the idea there is to build up storage in Cachuma to further maximize reliability. Portfolio 3 also includes enhancing state water project reliability through banking, so implementation of a banking program. So maximize reliability is really all of the above portfolio to give the city the most robust future supplies that we could develop. Portfolio 4, minimize cost. What we did was we leveraged the baseline portfolio and then modeled a higher investment in conservation. So that reduced demands by 710 acre feet per year of build out. And we wanted to see how the existing portfolio would perform if the city just invested in conservation going forward. Portfolio 5 is minimize environmental impacts. So we thought that really would reflect minimizing use of Kachuma to minimize environmental impacts on the Santa Ynez River system, minimize delivery of state project water because of environmental impacts in the Delta, and minimizing delivery of desal because of concerns around discharge of the concentrate from the desal facility to the ocean. To meet the supply demand gap, that required a high potable reuse supply option. So 6,000 acre feet per year of potable reuse plus higher conservation. So 710 acre feet per year of additional conservation. Portfolio 6, maximize local control. In that portfolio, we didn't want to rely on imported supplies. So we didn't take any delivery of state project water or surplus water, and in fact, looked to the long-term exchange and transfer market to sell the city's existing state project water to gain some revenue benefit. This portfolio also includes expansion of desal to 5,000 acre feet per year, implementation of potable reuse at 2,900 acre feet per year, and higher conservation. So these supplies really focus on local control. And then, as I mentioned, the optimized portfolios that we developed next were kind of hybrids. So portfolio 7 is what we call moderate potable reuse. And it's the same as portfolio 3, but just without the state project banking. Portfolio 8, expansion of desal, is the same as portfolio 2, plus the expansion of desal. And portfolio 9, expand and prioritize desal, is the same as 8, with desal prioritized in all years, and the idea there being, again, trying to maximize carryover storage. Yes, Commissioner Young, you have a question?
Yeah, do you mind, Chair Keller, if I ask questions
No, please,
before because there's so much packed in these slides
Yeah.
Okay, so getting back to point number 5.
Yes.
Have we identified that the brine waste from desal is impacting the marine environment?
The environmental, and I haven't, I'm not an expert in this, but my review of the EIR is that it does not have a significant environmental impact. But Joshua, do you want to provide additional input?
Yeah,
there?
and I would categorize really the minimized environmental impact for desal is really the electrical usage. And so it's been listed here, and I think part of the conversations we go through here is one of our big moves is to power desal with 100% renewable energy. We're moving towards that. And so we'll be talking a little bit more about that as we get to the next week when we start talking about the triple bottom line. But really, we believe that, we've modeled the brine discharge for desal, and we do believe it has very minimal impacts, particularly since we are blending it with our treated wastewater. And we believe our intake is been designed to minimize impact and marine mortality as well. So really the focus, I think, here for us was really on the electrical, because the electrical consumption is high.
Okay, and have we done any monitoring to confirm that the intake and the discharge are having minimal or nominal effect on the marine environment?
And that'd be, we are doing outfall monitoring. That's a requirement of our permit. And the intake monitoring is another story. I mean, we certainly are going out and doing inspections of the area. And I think what's helpful to understand is the intake is located basically in a sandy desert. Like there isn't any major fixed rock coral reefs or anything else out there. We're pretty basically talking about a migratory sand bottom that's moving around. And so we really are kind of left with just it's a very low productivity area to begin with, but there are studies that can be done, an entrainment entrapment study to see that. But Then we'll also have the intake water quality that's coming in as a kind of a secondary look of what actually is coming in through the plant and what we're actually filtering out. I mean, that's a good take on what it is. And most of that material that's coming in is mostly sand. That's what we're finding in the filters.
Now, the intake is above the surface of the, it's on the bottom.
It's on the bottom. It's located
Right.
about 30 feet of water, and it's
Right.
it's located above the
So,
bottom. Yeah.
I mean, my concern would be not with the sandy bottom communities, but with the water column in plankton communities. They're moving around and coming into the intake. So have we looked at what might be harmed?
We did.
Okay.
Yes, we looked extensively at that when we were updating our permits with the regional board, and arrived at a value that we would use to participate in the Devereaux Slough rehabilitation. They were redoing the Devereaux Slough, and the city participated at a $500,000. But to get to that $500,000, we did some modeling of what kind of marine life was impacted by the intake of the facility.
So I do remember that discussion and what happened at the regional board, but I'm curious whether we've actually done any field monitoring to confirm.
not.
We have not. Okay. All right. Thank you.
A study, depending, you do a year-long study, it's somewhere between $750,000 to $1 million for that study, if we wanted to do that. I do have a proposal from a contracting firm to do that, and I have been looking to see if there's any grant funding or partners that might want to go in on something like that, and I haven't been successful yet in finding anything.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you, Commissioner Young. And I do want to make the point, I think it's a very good point made by Commissioner Young. I think we shouldn't emphasize when we say some of the environmental impacts of desal. The biggest one is really the energy. I think that's the most significant. I think the ocean quality issues are there, but they're much, much smaller. So I think when we do that conversation, I did have a couple of questions though. The first one is the title of the second one, based on prioritized. And then we say we prioritize desal and state water project over Cachuma to conserve water in Cachuma. But it gives the impression that, for example, we're prioritizing to use more, that we think that, these two sources, desal and state water project, should have a higher priority for what reason? I mean, I think that the title really, it's not really the baseline because we're really making a big change if we're putting those priorities. So maybe the title is the thing that is sort of clashing with me. We have to think about whether that's the right name for that scenario because it's different from baseline, no?
Yeah,
The
I think the way I would describe it, and we're going to get into this in the next few slides, is when we start to build our water supply response, you'll see recycled waters at the bottom, right? That's just, we're going to do that. And then you start building that up. And basically what we're talking about here is that we would operate desal and preserve our Cachuma supplies to help meet those demands. I think that's what we're talking about here, and I'm open to the wordsmithing it if there's a better way to describe it if we get through this. But that's the intent.
No, I understand the intent, and that's why I get the intent. I think it's more the language and whether we say preserving Cachuma water or something like that rather than prioritizing these other ones for The other one is the portable reuse here, for example, in scenarios 5 and 6 and then 7, that's direct potable reuse?
That is surface water augmentation. So I'm trying to get away, use the new nomenclature. We only talk about direct potable reuse because we're not concerning delivering it directly to homes, but it would be delivering it to Laurel and then treating it again as the surface water. That's the concept that currently is not permitted, but they're working on the regulations for that.
Okay. All right. Okay. Thank you. Any other questions? I guess Commissioner Davis.
just a comment. One, I have a different view on the prioritized desal state water over Kachuma. I think it says exactly what that. So when we get to that and have further discussion, because I have some other questions and comments at that point, but I actually have a different view. I kind of like what it says because it says, I think, the direction that staff wants to go. And so when we get there, we'll have more discussion, I hope.
Okay, yeah. No, I agree that that's the priority. My only point is when it says baseline, it gives the impression that we think that that's the baseline. It's not really the baseline. It's a big change from the baseline. So that's my only problem is with the word baseline right there. But yeah. Yes, Commissioner Young.
Another question. Out of curiosity, why don't we keep track somewhere in this of the amount of El Estero water, wastewater that's actually discharged to the ocean? I mean, isn't that a potential supply of water that could be treated?
Right, and that recycled water, utilizing that recycled water is reflected in portfolios 5, 6, and 7. Yeah.
Oh,
And 9. I don't think so.
so that's reflected in potable reuse?
That's correct. Yeah, that's wastewater that would otherwise be discharged to the ocean.
So what is the maximum amount of potable reuse coming out of El Estero? In other words, if we were to recapture every drop that we could, allowing for whatever needs to be discharged to take waste out, what is that number?
Well, let me start back. So there are some challenges with wastewater flows in the sense that you're going to build this facility, right, to treat wastewater flows, where our wastewater flows don't come in nice and even. As you all know, we still have issues with rainwater getting into our sewer system. So there are times in January, February, March where we have these incredible inflows, 30 million gallons a day coming into El Estero, but there is by no means you're going to build a treatment plant that's going to treat 30 million gallons of potable reused water, right? So we would be designing a potable reuse facility more around the diurnal daily average flows, right? That'd be kind of what you're looking at. And so with that, I think, I think right now we're somewhere around 5,000 acre feet a year is what I think we can truly get out of it. I think with the projections and the community using more water, we could have the potential of getting close to 6,000. And I think we certainly can get into that some more, but that's what I think is viable as far as what we can actually harness out of the wastewater that we currently are treating and releasing to the ocean.
Mm-hmm.
Good. Well, that explains that for me. So I think that's good to know. I just, without seeing El Estero somewhere in here, that information kind of becomes obscured to me. So that 6,000 acre feet per year really is maximizing what we think can be captured out of El Estero.
Right.
Yes. And that there will still be discharges to the ocean, but that I think that is probably the maximum feasible.
Got it. Thank you.
Okay, if we don't have any more questions, we'll continue with the presentation.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Keller. And actually, as it relates to portfolio 2, I mean, that could easily be changed to existing supplies prioritized. That's really the intent. But let's keep going. So, So now that we formed the portfolios, the next step was to design a simulation to evaluate the performance of those portfolios. So the design of that simulation is based upon historical hydrology from 1993 to 2019. And then to build out a 30-year data set, we added 3 additional years of drought to come up with a design drought at the tail end of that, that period. So that basically becomes our period of record. And then as it relates to demands, we took the baseline demand projection, as you recall from our demand projection analysis within the demand envelopes. We took the baseline projection for most of the portfolios, except for the portfolios that included investment in higher conservation. And for those portfolios, we used the higher conservation demand projection. As for existing supplies, we adjusted those supplies for risk, so we applied the risk adjustments. And the new supplies we evaluated were desal expansion and potable reuse. And then extraordinary conservation, which we're defining as conservation above and beyond what's currently being implemented through the conservation, through the city's conservation programs in the face of a drought. So basically extraordinary conservation closes that gap between supply and demand, but only as a last resort. So this graph is essentially a summary of the future portfolio analysis, and I'll walk you through what you're looking at. The portfolios are listed here, 1 through 9. Each column represents a portfolio, and the stacked column is the supplies in acre feet per year. You can see that on the y-axis. The numbers across the top are the average annual supply across the 30-year planning horizon for that portfolio. So 2020 to 2050. And then the stacked column includes several columns of different colors. Those colors represent different supplies. And you can see in the left-hand side of the table, what those colors represent. And then the key for the portfolios is here on the right, 1 through 9. And then the numbers in this table represent the total acre feet per year delivered by each of those supplies for each of those portfolios. So as an example, portfolio 5, which is minimize environmental impact, you can see the large purple column here. That's representative of the high potable reuse use. So that's all water that would otherwise be discharged to the ocean through your existing recycled water facility. These lighter blue columns are desalination, and we'll talk a bit more about how each of these portfolios stacks up. You can see these portfolios 4, 5, and 6, because they include investments in additional conservation, total demand is lower. And then the other portfolios, the demand is higher. So we'll get into more details on each of these portfolios, but wanted to pause here for a second. If you had any questions, I imagine that many of your questions will be addressed in the next segment of the presentation, but happy to answer any questions that you have.
Commissioner Young?
Thank you, Chair Keller. So what's the takeaway from this graph, if there is one?
I think that the main thing with this graph is just to orient you how the analysis works. So it's basically applying these supplies in different proportions and in different amounts to meet the projected demand. So this is just a high-level summary. There's no specific takeaway. It's just kind of an orientation. And the colors on the columns and the way that the supplies are represented on those columns, it's the same format that we're going to use for the next series of graphs. So just trying to get you oriented to how this analysis is laid out and to give you a general sense for how these portfolios are different and similar from one another. But there's no real high-level takeaway yet.
So Commissioner Young, maybe it'd help if I kind of laid out where we're headed. So we're going to actually dive into each one of these in the next slides. We're going to dive into each one of these in detail. And then we're going to end with this slide here again, kind of pulling it all back together. So, and again, I apologize. I mean, there's so much stuff to get through, but getting through this, and then where I think this really comes together is then we're going to take these in our next meeting next week, and we're going to dive into putting these up against the values that we heard from the community, social, environmental, and affordability. And then we're going to evaluate these and give you some further ways of kind of looking at each one of these and kind of comparing them.
So this is interesting. So each then of the vertical 1 through 9, these represent each of the portfolios. And so is this exercise in getting us to a point where we're going to somehow blend these 9 to come up to an optimum portfolio going forward?
No, not necessarily.
Yeah, I don't know about blending them. Yeah.
Yeah, the intent is to just represent the themes that we described. The last 3, as I mentioned, they are hybrid portfolios. there is room for some optimization, but we tried to capture kind of the range of options in these 9 portfolios. So we don't anticipate doing any kind of additional blending of portfolios. Portfolios 7, 8, and 9 do that optimization based upon what we learned when we evaluated the prior portfolios.
I think what will happen is we'll do the evaluation for the triple bottom line. I think that's the next step, but yeah.
Okay. All right.
Councilmember Sneddon?
Thank you, Chair Keller. I just want to make sure I'm understanding some of the graph correctly as we're going forward. So there's no scenario here where desal is not in the portfolio. Desal is everywhere. It's just different amounts.
Right.
And then our definition of extraordinary conservation, because I know we've kind of talked about how we're conserving now is extraordinary conservation. Is that the 30%? Is that what is our working definition for the purpose of these charts for what extraordinary conservation means?
So extraordinary conservation is reduction beyond the 15% reduction that we've identified as our level of service goal. We'll talk a bit more about that in the next segment. But it's basically when the available supplies under a given scenario don't meet the projected demand and there's a gap, then that gap has to be met somehow. And the way we meet that gap is through what we call extraordinary conservation.
Okay, so I just want to make sure that's a little bit different definition than how we've been talking about it at Water Commission when we make up the gap in our portfolio by this extraordinary conservation, which is what, like 30%? So this isn't a static number.
Right.
This is a dynamic number in the future that will change according to
Right.
future. Okay, so it is different. It is different than how we've talked about it.
Right. So what we're going to be showing now is going into these portfolios, and we're going to lay them across a hydrograph basically of different weather patterns and see how each one of these perform. And I think when we talk about extraordinary conservation, this is where our water supplies reach a situation in where what we have is not enough and we have to ask our community for more. But built into this is already what I consider lifestyle conservation. We are every day making choices to minimize. This is where we're going to our community and saying, we need you guys to step it up. We need you to take it to another level because our current supplies won't meet that. And I think as we get into kind of diving into the next few slides, that'll hopefully make a little more sense.
So terminology wise, just sort of a switch in Water Commission, we're now going to call that lifestyle conservation, sort of where we are right now, just so I don't have yeah? I mean, I like it. I like lifestyle conservation. Let's go with it. But okay, thank you. That answers my question.
Is it okay if I jump in really quick too?
Please.
I think this might help clarify. I know we've heard from the commission over the last couple of years as we have been reporting on conservation in the drought. When are we going to define the new normal? And I think this is that point. We're redefining the new normal. So we have our new demands that have come out of this analysis. And now we're going to be measuring against those projected demands as our new normal. And so I think we will start transitioning away from that talk of how much are we conserving versus the most pre-drought demands of 2013. And you'll start seeing that in our conversations moving forward in Water Commission.
Excellent. This is perfect timing for that. And I just wanted to make sure I was understanding that transition. Thank you.
Commissioner Davis?
Talking of terminology, and again, maybe it's how it's handled in the industry. I've always had a hard time saying conservation is a supply. Right? Conservation to me is a demand management strategy and not a supply. And again, the crosshatched area there really is a supply shortage, which needs to be made up in some other way, right? And conservation is one other way to do it. Going out and purchase more supplemental water is another way to do it. It goes on, but I've always just had a problem, and from a public standpoint, looking at our charts, that we say average supplies, and in the report we talk about conservation as a supply. Again, it's a demand management strategy and not a supply, and maybe it's my own pick. But again, I see that as a supply shortage, which these particular scenarios don't meet the projected demand during those years, which would be needed to be made up. So just a comment, but I have a hard time with the terminology.
No, and I appreciate that. And I think what I intended to do, or we intended to do when we set out, was to put I'm going to say a spin on it, but a positive outlook on what is the community contributing when they are going beyond their ordinary activities. And it felt hollow to not give credit to that. And I think we landed on this extraordinary conservation approach, but I'm open to different ways of presenting that, and recognizing our community's ability to reach, when we ask them, to this new level.
Yeah, and again, my comment is just, I don't know, nitpicky, that it's not a supply, it's demand management. When we don't make our demand, we have to make it up in some way. One way of doing that is changing our behavior and getting conservation. So again, it's one of my little curiosities I have a hard time accepting. So we've been doing this so long and doing it this way, it's become essentially a term of art here in Santa Barbara. I wouldn't do it in the end. I don't think the industry would do it this way, but who am I to know? Thank you.
Okay, if there are no further questions, let's go ahead. Mr. Saito.
Okay, we will carry on. So now that we're ready to move on, I'm going to hand it over to Rob Morrow. Rob is really the technical expert on our team that designed and built the model that prepared the results that you're looking at. He's going to walk us through each of the portfolios and talk a little bit about some of the nuances of those portfolios. So Rob?
All right, thank you, Jeff. Thank you, commissioners. So I'm going to walk through the individual modeling of each portfolio. And let's see. Okay, I can adjust this here now. Great. And so what this is in front of you, I'm just going to walk you through it real quick because we use this for each of the scenarios, and this is how we view, or each of the portfolios. And this is one of the main outputs of our system model. And so as you saw in the previous graph, we're trying to be consistent with coloring. So you've got recycled water along the bottom. We've got Mission Tunnel in gray, Gibraltar water in orange, groundwater in non-drought periods in light green, Kachuma in dark blue, state water in dark brown, desalination in light blue. This hatched brown is supplemental water. So you're using your state water project capacity that you're paying for, but the allotment isn't there from the state. And so you're having to buy supplemental water on the market to fill those demands. And then we've got this extraordinary conservation out here. And what you're seeing is the 30-year simulation. As Jeff mentioned, it's starting in 1993 and continuing through 2019, plus the last 3 years of assuming an extended drought. And this dark black line is actually the lake levels on Kachuma these last 30 years. And as you can see, and you're well aware, it had a severe drop in the most recent drought starting in about 2013 and hitting bottom in around 2017. And so what this is overlaid because it becomes an important component because you don't know when you're entering an extended drought until you're in the middle of it. And so part of the portfolios are looking at how can you best prepare for a drought without knowing you're entering an extended one. And that's where Kachuma carryover supplies become very important. In this baseline scenario, we're not having any carryover water because with our risk-adjusted supplies, which is lower yields for most of the surface waters, we don't even have enough supply, or we're using our Kachuma water every year, and even in some of these years, we're buying water on the open market just to meet demand. And then when we meet an extended drought, this is up to 25% conservation. And so this does not meet our level of service goals of staying within the 15%, but it just shows this is an example of our simulation output. I should mention too, what this is following is the baseline demand projection that came out of the city's water conservation plan that Madaus Water Management presented back in September to you guys. And so we've been working with them throughout this entire period. And so that, when we say our baseline projection, that was from their work they did. And then we looked at the different variables that went into that to consider what may impact future city decisions. Okay, so then the next supply, the prioritized supplies, so the existing supplies but prioritized, basically that's operating desalination year in and year out. And what that allows, what you see from this is what it allows you to do is carry over Kachuma water. And so instead of using that water before you buy your state water, you buy state water and use desal before, and then you're carrying over this water. So when the beginning of this drought happens, and this is in the 2004 timeframe when there was 2 out of 3 dry years, and the lake started to drop to about 100,000 acre feet. You then got a big rain the following year in 05, and so that's why it recovered so quickly. But it helps with your supplies going into a drought. Once you get into an extended drought, there's only so much you can do, and you're really dependent on those reliable supplies, the supplies that are precipitation independent. One thing I did want to note too is that carryover water, you lose carryover water when the lake spills. And historically, it's spilled once out of 3 years. It's modeled to spill once out of 4 years going forward. But what's happening here at the top of these lake levels is the lake is actually spilling. And so building up your Kachuma carryover reserves is a balance in using more expensive supplies to build a storage reserve going into a drought versus potentially losing those supplies when it spills. And so that's where some of even though you're carrying over water, sometimes you lose it when those events happen. But as you can see here, in about 4 to 5 years, it went from a full lake to a very low lake. And so what these portfolios are looking at is how can we manage that? And then how can we manage it in the out years of a drought? And again, we have high extraordinary conservation in this, greater than 15%, in the 15 to 25% range. And so this portfolio didn't meet our minimum level of service. Okay, so the third portfolio, maximize reliability. Similar to the last one, except we add potable reuse. So we add a few thousand acre feet of potable reuse. And so now we have more reliable supplies in a drought period. And you can see a higher use of Kachuma carryover water here. And then you can see that there's very little extraordinary conservation happening because you have these reliable supplies during a drought. So rainfall independent. So you've got 6,000 acre feet of supply regardless. And the other thing you can see is that we're assuming small allocations from the State Water Project. And these hatched brown lines are supplemental water purchases, or in this case, through groundwater banking is what we've assumed. And so it's assuming you're maximizing the capacity of your state water infrastructure, but just filling it with water that's beyond Table A allocation for the year and coming out of a groundwater bank or in other cases, purchase on the market. So this was good. Okay, yes, Commissioner Young.
Thank you. So I just want to make sure that the 6,000 acre feet of desal is net of anything that we send to Montecito.
That is correct. Let's see. Well, no, hold on. The Montecito demand is in the baseline demand projection. And so some of this water would be going to Montecito. This is the existing capacity of the desalination plant. It's just operating at 3,125 acre feet per year, year in and year out. So this is not specifying what drop of water is going to Montecito.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, no problem. So just the one thing I wanted to point out is that we just have 1 year of extraordinary conservation, and so we're meeting our goal for this themed portfolio, maximize reliability. Yes, Commissioner Keller.
Yes, a quick question. So the Cachuma Lake volume that you're showing here, is it changing from the scenarios? It seems like it's the same.
It's the same.
Okay, so you're not really reflecting that we may or may not have a different volume with these scenarios.
Well, the city's use and store and carryover has a very small impact compared to evaporation and releases and so yeah.
Right.
Yeah, so it's that hydrology, and to be honest, it gets into a much more complicated modeling to start changing a lot of.
Okay, just to understand. So basically, it's not changing. So I shouldn't expect.
That's
it
correct.
Okay, thank you,
Commissioner Davis.
Davis.
Two quickies. You show Cachuma allocation kind of staying the same way out there in the extreme drought. When in the experience we've had, the lake goes dry and basically we don't get allocations. So I'm a hard time understanding the dark blue looks like Cachuma allocation out there in 2047 to 2050.
Mm-hmm. Well, and what we assumed for that extended drought was the average supply you guys received over the worst 3 years of the most recent drought. So there was a single year without allocation, but you still received about a third of the supply 2 years, and so there's assuming, we're not assuming it doesn't rain again. It's just it is an extended dry period.
Yeah, again, my comment just is it sure seems as if we get into the extended drought, years 5 through whatever 9, 10, there's not going to be any allocation for Cachuma. It's going to be down in such a small amount. And I'm just graphically just looking. It's not that dissimilar to previous years. It looked like a lot of Cachuma water during that extreme drought. And then my second question is really a question. When you show the pop-up of the recycled water, I'm assuming that's potable reuse at that point, right?
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Okay, yeah, good. Because that answers that question. Thanks.
Yeah. So anytime you see it jump up like that that in this case it's potable reuse. We're trying to minimize the amount of colors you're going to see too.
And just one last question. I should have asked this a long time ago. What is the numbers on the y-axis on the right?
Sorry, I should have pointed that out. So that's the lake volume. So
thank
so
you.
it's associated with this.
No, that's exactly it. Thank you so much.
Okay.
It does have the legend on there. Yeah, it's just a little bit.
So Commissioner Davis, what we're getting with that, I'm glad you brought that up, and that's kind of leading into our conversation next week, which is parameters of which we might operate desal and or other supplies may be triggered off the elevation of Cachuma. And so we're hoping to get into that next week. But that's why that's on here, and I'm kind of adding a little more detail to that. And I wanted to also clarify, because that's come up before. Yeah, we do not see a huge demand for non-potable recycled water. So basically our current recycled water system, we do not see that there is a huge demand for that in the community. And when we show it on here, we are strictly talking about potable reuse, so taking it to that next level of treatment. And I do have to say here, I did talk with Hillary Hauser of Healy Oceans, and I do have some comments she wanted me to share with you, but I'll share that with the committee at the end. Commission at the end.
Great. My only Commissioner Keller, thank you. I missed the legend. I'm sorry. It's one of those things. I just hadn't seen the legend. Thanks for pointing it out.
Yeah, there's a lot on here. So, and I'll just go back one. Whoops. So I go back to number 2. So this is when it's not jumping up. We're assuming non-potable reuse is continuing. Just no conversion to a potable reuse system. Okay, so I'll jump to number 4 now, which is minimize costs. So in this case, we used our existing supplies and did not make any additional capital investments, and instead tried to stay within our parameters by applying higher conservation. And you can see that reflected in the demand. So what we're trying to reflect is this is the projected post-drought demand rebound. We don't know if this is going to happen, but if it does, it starts to trigger actions that the city is going to need to take to manage those demands, whether it be supply or additional conservation. And so in this case, higher conservation is implemented once this starts peaking, and it brings it down, and then there's a little bit more as time goes on with a little bit of growth happening. And so what this portfolio shows is you can manage demand to the point that it can stay within that 15% goal, but in an extended drought, you're stretched pretty thin. You've got really no buffer here because you are maximizing all your supplemental water purchases. You're at close to 15% conservation throughout, and you're maximizing all your supplies. So this is the lowest cost portfolio because you've avoided a lot of investments, but it's also has the most extraordinary conservation that meets the minimum level of service. And I think I'll point out one other thing. So we mentioned this is the risk-adjusted supplies that we're projecting. So this is lower yield than even than you're seeing today. And so what's interesting is that it's projected that you'll need to, in that scenario, you need to operate desal year in, year out just to meet normal demands, non-drought demands. And that's because if there were cutbacks on surface water supplies, they're not as available as they have been historically. Okay, so then number 5 is minimize environmental impacts. And so as Jeff mentioned, we're looking at minimizing Kachuma, State Water Project, and desalination. And the only way to do that is to maximize potable reuse. So we landed on about 6,000 acre feet. And to follow up on an earlier comment, some of the flow assumptions and those, an explanation of that is in the cost basis TM, attachment F under potable reuse. It gets into some of the flow assumptions used in the previous potable reuse feasibility study and how we landed on 6,000 acre feet. But what you see here is once that's in place, you're able to meet all your demands with only Kachuma, and then once Kachuma supplies start to go down in an extended drought, you backfill those with desalination and State Water Project and supplemental water, which is similar to how you've been operating historically. But this 6,000 acre feet of potable reuse provides that reliable supply. And this also has the higher conservation, again, to keep the demands down. Okay, so then the next one is
Rob, on that, I just wanted to clarify too, that in that scenario, we'd actually be ending the use of the non-potable system to make that transition. So we would no longer have a non-potable irrigation customers. They would all then be switched over to potable water customers and would all be receiving the same water that every customer gets.
And that's primarily because the potable reuse feasibility study that was done a few years ago, and then that we reviewed and added some assumptions to, is using most of the non-potable system to get up to Cater. So it uses the existing system to get to the golf course and then new pipe up to Cater. And so you can't have, so anyway, it replaces that system. Okay, so number 6 appears to be a repeat of number 5, and I remember replacing that, but it doesn't seem to have been replaced. So I'll just explain it. Number 6 is investing in moderate potable reuse, so to about 3,000 acre feet, and then a desal expansion, which is to 5,000 acre feet. So what it does is you've got 8,000 acre feet that you're not seeing right here, but you can imagine, of potable reuse and desalination. So supply that's rainfall independent and that you have year in and year out. And what that actually allows you to do is not have to import any water from Northern California. And so this one and the previous one have the highest capital cost because we're making the biggest investments in new supply. So the last one was a high potable reuse, and this one is moderate potable reuse plus desal expansion. So those are the two highest capital intensive ones, but they also do not have any extraordinary conservation. So they're the two portfolios without any, even in the worst case conditions, which this is 2016 with zero allocation from Kachuma and no water to be able, that can be diverted from Gibraltar. Okay, so those are the four themed portfolios. The next one is the three optimized hybrids.
Hey, Rob,
Yes.
can I just talk about the maximum local control? So I know this isn't the right
Yeah.
graphic here, but I just wanted to talk about the nuances of this. So when you think about potable reuse and desal, one of the challenges are you're going to have a constant output, right? And our demands are not constant. Our demands fluctuate seasonally. We typically use twice as much water in the summer month as we do in a winter month. And so you have to have a body of water, AKA Kachuma, well, I guess to some extent Gibraltar, that can act as that buffer. Because one of the challenges you're going to get when you're running potable reuse and desal in the winter is you actually may have to throttle back those supplies to some extent. So we get into the realities of this. In February, demands in the community are so low that you may not be able to maximize the full use of desal and potable reuse. And then in the summer, you're running those things full throttle, and that's where you need to have your surface water supplies to augment it. So there are some challenges as we get into this, and we can talk more about it, but I just wanted to point out some of the difficulties with it. You know, it's one thing to supply it to the community, but then to talk about how you manage those supplies month in and month out when your demands from the community can vary significantly. So, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Joshua. Okay, there we go. Number 7, potable reuse. So you see the jump when potable reuse starts, and desalination is operating most years, but not at full capacity. And you're meeting demands very well, and you get into an extended drought. And again, you start to invest in supplemental water and using your groundwater from storage. And so this is able to meet the baseline demand projection with just 1 year of extraordinary conservation. Okay, and then the next one is desal expansion, and which is very similar performance as the potable reuse because it's a similar supply amount. And in this case, desal is used as the last supply after all the basically similar to the existing supply prioritization. And so early on, it's not used at full capacity because the other supplies are able to almost meet those demands. But when the extended drought occurs, you switch from your local surface water dependent supplies to desalination and supplemental water, state water project. And so again, we're meeting our baseline demand projection with 1 year of supply shortage. So one question we had to this, well, what would be the benefit if desal was run every year? Would there be some drought benefits, and how much more would it cost to do that? What are the cost impacts? So the last portfolio was prioritizing desal and expanding desal, and so that's why it was shifted to the bottom here. And what you see compared to the previous one is there are several years with carryover storage. And so it helps initially when a drought starts, but there's only so much carryover that can get you through the beginning of a drought, and that quickly gets used, and then you transition to your reliable supplies and imported water supplies. So those are the 9 portfolios. This is a repeat of the slide you saw before. I have just a couple slides on the main characteristics of these from a cost perspective and a extraordinary conservation perspective, and then we're going to take a break and get additional feedback, and then Jeff's going to talk a little bit more about next steps and how this is going to apply for triple bottom line. Okay, so costs. And so the way we presented these here is we modeled most of the city's water supply costs for each supply and included that as part of the baseline. And then we did that for each of these supplies. And so that includes existing debt service, existing O&M for groundwater, and these include capital investments in new facilities, so potable reuse, and then operating costs for potable reuse. And so the highest cost ones have multiple supplies that are invested in. So 5 and 6 both have 5,000 acre feet to 6,000 acre feet of new supplies. And whether it be only potable reuse or whether it be some potable reuse and some desalination expansion. So, and then we have in the middle these hybrids, which are a small amount of investment in supplies, or the minimized cost one even has additional costs compared to baseline. And that's operating desalination more, and that's buying more supplemental water to be able to meet the level of service goals. And so that's how that's the cost increase. And what this is the millions of dollars over 30 years. So for number 4, $27 million over 30 years is roughly $1 million a year. So that's cost outputs from the portfolio operations. Yep.
Yeah, just a quick question. So you mentioned this is capital cost, so it's a capital investment, and with some operating and maintenance for some of them. Just to be clear, how the cost is being presented here?
Yeah, so it's life cycle costs. So we escalated costs each year and brought them back to present value. It includes debt service, fixed costs, and O&M costs. The only thing it doesn't include all costs that are common to every portfolio. So say city staff and things like that we didn't get down to the level of rate setting costs, but we made sure to include any costs that would differentiate between.
So this is the differential compared to the baseline. That's why the baseline is 0, and everything else is everything that goes with those. Okay, got it. Thank you.
Correct. Okay. So the other key thing is the level of service, and so we touched on this earlier. But you guys currently have 3 water shortage stages. DWR's new guidance for urban water management planning and water shortage contingency plans is to add a 4th stage that addresses basically emergency conditions. So when you can only meet less than half of your unrestricted demand. And so that's what we will be adding to the water shortage contingency plan. Otherwise, we're leaving it basically similar to how it is now. But for the portfolio analysis, we're focusing on staying within stage 1 is our goal. And that's similar to what was done in previous planning efforts. It's also prudent because we can't predict everything. So this provides some conservatism. Also, there is some concern on a little bit of demand hardening as more and more conservation occurs. How much can actually be cut back through extraordinary conservation as normal use gets tighter and tighter. So this is just a profile of each of the 9 portfolios. When we get into the triple bottom line analysis, we've got a whole list of these that we're using for the characterization, but we're focusing on just right now the extraordinary conservation and the comparative cost. So across the top is the number of years of extraordinary conservation in stage 1, which is fine, but you can see that portfolio 4 had the most, 5 and 6 didn't have any. And then you can also see that 1 and 2 had multiple years, 4 years of 15 to 25% cutbacks. And so those portfolios were actually screened out from further consideration. And then we focused on the remaining 7. And I've mentioned this, but what these portfolios really capture is the trade-off of low cost and lower reliability during a drought, and higher cost and high reliability during droughts. And so that's where the 7, 8, 9, we tried to thread the needle a little bit, understanding that when we're talking about costs, we're talking ultimately about rate impacts and affordability. And so balancing out the push and pull of providing a highly reliable supply with providing an affordable supply. So with that, I'll take a break to see if there's any additional questions from what we've covered so far.
Thank you. I think this is very clear. Can you go back 1, please? So, I mean, I think this is a striking, as you know, my first thought is, darn, that number 1, that's the cheapest one, and yet, you know, it's going to give us, so it's 7 years of stage 1 or 2 drought. Is that, yeah.
Yes, right. So 7 years out of 30, and that's 30, really, yeah.
Right, and clearly that's not so. And then later we'll be looking at, I think next week, we're going to be looking at other factors, for example, regulatory aspects and how that may affect or potable reuse, for example. So if it gets pushed a few years down because we still can't figure out if we can use potable water from that source, that's an issue. No? So, okay. Commissioner Davis.
Thank you. I guess this is a comment, not a question. And I'll preface by saying I'm an old dog that has a hard time learning new tricks. I mean that in the fact that we're flipping the paradigm, which I've lived under for 30 or 40 years, where we in fact prioritize our surface waters, use that, and then desal and conservation as the drought supply. And we did that because, one, the cost, that was the low cost. We couldn't deal with the question that we would lose water through evaporation or spill. And those waters basically weren't under our control and could be changed in the future. So it was use it or lose it, and to some degree. And again, you know, going to conservation and to desal, those were the ones that were there when we needed them during conservation. I mean, during a drought. Now we flip that paradigm and we're basically saying, and we've used the term desal in order to store water, which again, I'm going to take a week to try to get my head around that comment, because again, it's a hard one for me to get there. I understand, and I've seen what you showed me, and I asked my question about the Cachuma water bars during the extreme droughts, and understanding all of the reliability and regulatory issues that are embodied within Cachuma. I'm just making a comment that this old dog's going to have a hard time trying to understand the phrase, we're going to expand desal in order to store water at Cachuma. So it's a comment. I've heard the explanation. I've read the analysis that you have there. And I like the fact that we said next week we're going to talk about the role of desal, which essentially, this is my prelude to that discussion. But anyway, thank you for the presentation.
Welcome.
Yeah, Commissioner Kilburn.
Yeah, I just had questions, just curious about some of the groundwater aspects of these charts and kind of the assumptions that went into it. It looks like we're using our safe yield for several years. Just kind of curious, like, how did you pick the starting year for that? And then when we're getting down towards the trail end of that, we're diving into our groundwater storage and basically depleting our basins is what it's looking like there. It's just kind of curious what the assumptions were on that.
Yeah, that's correct. So what we assumed is following the current policy, which is letting the basin recover post drought. So that the timing of this is right after the late 80s, early 90s drought, where the basin was drawn down. And so the way this works is we're assuming we're not touching groundwater until it recovers. And so for this, we assume 5 to 7 years. And then we're using it year in and year out until we hit multiple dry years, and then we stop. And we're using it as the last supply because it, even though it's less expensive than some of the supplemental water supplies, it is really one of the last resorts. So Joshua, do you want to comment?
No, I like that we finally kind of distinguishing between that. I mean, it's in my tenure here, we haven't been in a position where we've been able to take the safe yield off the basin and leave it in good shape. So I'm kind of excited and kind of envisioning that's where we're working with USGS to kind of define kind of once the basin fills up, once we've pushed the chlorides back out, the salts back out into the ocean, you're going to get to a point where you can take this reasonable yield off of the basin without doing any major impacts to it, and still having that volume of water that you can go after when it gets dry. So we're starting to track those separately, and I think that's a big step for us. And I think for me, I can get my head wrapped around storage unit 1. I'm still struggling with what does that look like in Foothill Basin that has other users besides the city in. So I think we're going to be working closely with USGS to kind of define, when is the basin in good standing and we can take a safe yield off of that basin.
In the groundwater management TM, it's about 4 or 5 pages, goes into that a bit as far as the key assumptions there. And one thing just to note is in this example, in portfolio 4, we actually assume we've exhausted the groundwater from storage, and that's why it stops being used in an extended drought. And we used a similar volume as was used in the most recent drought. And so that's one of the main things we're recommending as far as working with USGS is to really understand that number and have it be something that the city's comfortable with, and not necessarily you're pumping until you've really induced seawater intrusion.
And then my other question was just on table A and how that's being projected to, because you go back to that minimized cost slide, which was I think 4 or whatever. Are we just assuming we're not getting table A in those years? We're paying for that water no matter what, so I feel like it should just always be in the chart if we're going to get it, right?
Yeah, and it's an interesting when the desal is not operating at full capacity, what's the most cost effective? But it's in almost all these, it's being used. The table A is being used in almost every year, and I think it's if you're able to store it, it's even better too. And so that's obviously one of our recommendations.
That's kind of a key point. We were very fortunate during this last drought to there was a good marketplace for buying excess water, but that is changing quickly. I think with the Groundwater Sustainability Act that went through, a lot of these groundwater basins now are buying up any excess water that's out there. And so I think it's become paramount that we secure an ability to store our state water securely somewhere for delivery during the next drought. And so this kind of reflects that kind of mentality that in those years when we do not need our state water, we are banking it. Hopefully it's somewhere within the Central Coast branch, so somewhere between San Luis Obispo and Santa Barbara County. We're finding some groundwater basin that we can bank our water in and get some portion of it back to help us meet the supplemental water needs during critical drought periods, because I just don't think the marketplace is going to be as favorable as it was during this last drought.
Thank you. Any other questions right now?
Can we go back to forward to the cost one? I think it's after the 9th scenario.
Yes, just a sec.
Chair Keller, I
one-
just want to do kind of a quick time check with you too. We got about 15 minutes before 3, and I
Yep.
think we have about 5 slides left. I think we have time. I just want to give you where we are.
Thank you very much. That's very helpful. Yeah, so my question is, potable reuse and expanding desal, the technologies are fairly similar. I mean, we're basically talking membranes and, and so it wouldn't be all that different. The cost seems to be at about twice as much for potable reuse in terms of the overall investment and the putting that in there. So any reason for that, being almost twice as much?
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
So the current desal plant that we have has been sized for expansion. So the pumps offshore, a lot of the piping that's been put in, and the design is kind of this expandable design. So it's really kind of been built around that, where a new potable reuse, we're talking building it from scratch, and a lot of that base infrastructure is not there. So that's really the big change there.
Okay, thank you very much. That's my last question, so we can move on to the next few slides.
Okay. I'm going to hand it back to Jeff to talk about next steps, as soon as I can get the slides there.
Okay, I'm getting oriented here. So now we're back to the recommendations for all portfolios. These are the same recommendations that we were looking at the beginning of the presentation. Nothing's changed here, but we wanted to revisit them in the context, now that you have the context from the portfolio analysis, if you had any additional comments on these recommendations, or if we can move on.
Any comments or recommendations? I mean, I think my only comment is the potable reuse has a significant regulatory uncertainty that, that's going to be a big challenge. And I see in some of those scenarios coming in 4 or 5 years. I don't know if that's going to happen, but we'll see. Okay. I think we can move forward.
Okay. Oops. Sorry, there's a little bit of a lag here. There we go. So before we wrap up the presentation today, we wanted to give you a sneak peek at the next piece of work in the portfolio evaluation. We didn't want to leave you with just cost and reliability as the only comparative metrics that we're looking at. We've applied a process called triple bottom line analysis to better differentiate between the portfolios based upon financial, social, and environmental criteria. And we call this TBL analysis, or TBL for short. So TBL analysis allows the city to evaluate these portfolios in a way that reflects the full range of considerations for the long-term well-being of the community. So the city can make a holistic decision that isn't strictly based on cost. So we're going to show you some preliminary results today, but don't worry, we'll dive deeper next week and give you the opportunity to drill into this analysis and understand the criteria in greater detail, the scoring process, and the sensitivity analysis that we conducted. So don't worry if some of this, you don't have your head all the way around it yet. We'll definitely have a chance to dive into it more next week. So for now, just consider the high-level approach, and the next deliverable you'll receive will include much more detail, more reading material. So this TBL scoring matrix provides a summary depiction of how the TBL process works. So for each category, financial, social, environmental, there's a set of criteria that consider important differentiating aspects of each portfolio. And those are listed down the left-hand side of the table. So you can see financial criteria, social criteria, environmental criteria, and then the criteria are listed in this column here. The portfolios are listed across the top, and the values within the table are reflective of how each portfolio performs relative to each criteria that is applied. So for example, the social criteria, local control, portfolios 5 and 6 score highly given their utilization of local supplies such as desal and potable reuse. Portfolios 3, 7, 8, and 9 have a medium score since they rely on a mix of imported and local supplies. And portfolio 4 is heavily reliant on purchase of supplemental water through the state project, so it scores low. So as you can see, cost is an important factor in this analysis as well, and it's represented across the top, and it's represented as cost above the baseline portfolio, as Rob described previously. So this is a representative result that sort of shows how these portfolios compare when you apply these triple bottom line criteria. And then once the scores are set for each portfolio, they can be weighted and aggregated to get a total normalized TBL score for each portfolio that becomes the basis for comparison and ultimately for portfolio selection. So this graph shows the portfolios along the bottom, and each column shows the weighted and normalized scores for the financial, which is green, social, which is yellow, and environmental, which is blue criteria. So the total weighted and normalized score for each portfolio is shown along the top. So you can see, like for portfolio 6, the green column represents the financial score, the yellow is the social, the blue is the environmental, and the total weighted normalized score is at the top. In this presentation, the higher score means it is more favorable, so it's scored better than the alternatives. So in this presentation, portfolio 8 has the highest combined TBL score of 0.7. So this approach allows you to quickly visualize the trade-offs between the alternatives, and you can see which alternatives are most beneficial to the city and which ones aren't. And you can quickly see how they're different and how they're similar across those 3 categories of financial, social, and environmental scores. So next steps is we will dive much deeper into the triple bottom line analysis. We're looking forward to that conversation, and through that discussion, be able to come to you with recommendations on future supply portfolio for the city that ultimately we hope will lead to policy recommendations, and we can lay out the adaptive implementation plan, which describes how the city will move forward with the policy and portfolio recommendations that we've laid out. So that concludes our presentation, and we welcome your questions. Appreciate your time and enjoyed the conversation.
Thank you very much for this presentation. I mean, it's a lot of material, but it's been very clearly presented, so thank you very much for that. Thank you. Questions from the commissioners or council members, Nathan?
Sorry, I'm slow coming on here. Can you hear me? I was having a little trouble with my, okay, thank you. So I am looking forward to our discussion next week. Do we have any public comment today? Did anyone come to
we do have the public on, and I do have a comment from Hillary Hauser. When we do get to public comment, she asked that I kind of present a challenge to the commission for more discussion. So when you're ready for public comment.
So at this point, it's just questions on this portion. Okay, no questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioners, any questions?
I'm good.
I'm good too.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so I think thank you again. Thank you for the presentation. And then we'll go and then hear about public comments at this point.
So Chuck Keller, before the commission meeting today, I got a call from Hillary Hauser of Heal the Oceans, and she wanted to raise an interesting concern. This gets back to this concept, let's just call it one city. And we've been talking about one water, but one city. And her point is an interesting one, and it goes, I think it's beyond the scope potentially of the Enhanced Urban Water Management Plan, but it's an interesting challenge. She's interested in more non-potable, recycled water being used. And she's extremely frustrated that the Parks Department right now is embarking on completely revisioning Ortega Park, which is right here in the downtown area, and has decided, I think right now, is kind of moving towards a synthetic turf in lieu of water and a recycled water. That site currently receives recycled water. And I believe some of the drivers are the cost of recycled water, which, as you know, we currently we subsidize it to some extent to make it affordable, but still the cost to parks is pretty significant for recycled water. And the other part is the maintenance that goes along with it. It's mowing the lawn, fertilizers, whatever they do to keep the lawn. So I think her challenge and Heal the Oceans has wanted to make it clear they vehemently are against synthetic lawns and want to encourage the use of recycled water instead of that water going out to the ocean. And how do we bring about a conversation to make that happen? I'm not sure how to bring that forward. I'm going to reach out to the Parks Director and let her know these issues, but it does cross departments. This isn't just a water issue. This is really kind of an end user. How does parks use it? Is turf a better alternative for our parks than a synthetic? All these other issues that come up, but I certainly hope I captured that comment right. I'm sure Hillary will chime in if I didn't capture that right. But how do we get that going? What's the role of Water Commission in helping that discussion move forward? Hopefully I captured Hillary's comments. That's what she wanted to try and convey today.
Thank you for that comment, and we'll take it on and try to meet the challenge. It's a very difficult one because it's not easy. I mean, it's expensive water, and that's one reason why even parks, even our city decides that it's not cost effective. But let's think about that and discuss that later on. Yes, Councilmember Sneddon.
Thank you, Chair Keller. I would add to that, it's not just Ortega Park, it's De La Guerra Plaza. I mean, redesigning that whole plaza, and it's with the assumption that grass is not sustainable or a good idea. And so the decisions and the recommendations that come out of Water Commission will shape a lot of projects across the city. And I think that Ms. Hauser's points are well taken, that it's not just one park or one area, but turf is now at the schools, the larger arenas throughout the city. And so that's a really important, I think, I would like to hear more about that at the next, when we talk about the triple bottom line, because that cost of recycled water, is that the only factor or not? And then to Commissioner Davis's points and questions about sort of flipping the paradigm of, surface waters first, then groundwater, stored water later. I think that's a really, it's not just an old dog question. I think we'll need to talk about that and how we understand that and how we recommend that forward. But just to Ms. Hauser's point that the policy decisions and the policy recommendations that come out of here have pretty far-reaching implications for planning throughout the city. And so I'm going to take sort of a back seat as you as commissioners come up with those recommendations, but they really, really matter. So.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, makes a lot of sense. Yeah, I mean, I think these are planning scenarios and we have to take them as such. And some of them involve making investments at certain stages, but I think the important thing is to keep an open mind about, we're gonna have to be flexible as we've been over the last decade, for example, with what we do year to year as we see what's available. The whole question of carryover is gonna be a big, big issue. I mean, if that changes, then we really have to go back and some of these scenarios just won't work if we have, we don't have carryover. So that's going to be an important discussion that we're going to have. And yeah, I mean, I think I'm with Ms. Hauser with respect to, I've always thought we should be doing more reuse of our waters, but I mean, it has to be something where it makes sense. It makes sense both from a cost perspective, environmental, because that water has a lot of energy actually with it. So we need to think about those factors as well. So what's the best option for us? Do we do some recharge with that? Other cities do that anyway. Other questions or comments? Any else from the public?
I don't see
Chair
any.
Keller, let me navigate to the public comment timer and
I don't
see
see
if
any
anyone raised their
hands up. Do you see any hands up? I don't see anything yet on the. Oh, there we go.
I have, yeah, there, we have one public comment. Molly Trop, let me unmute you. You are self-muted. You can go ahead and unmute yourself. Molly, can you try unmuting yourself? You are self-muted. There we go. One moment, we have a question from Molly. She doesn't have a mic. She's gonna go ahead and type her questions if that's okay.
You can
Sure.
start by chat.
Okay, let's give her a minute.
While she's typing, I just wanted to share, we did present the demands, Water Conservation Strategic Plan and the demands to the Planning Commission, which is a very unique board who sees a lot of different development, how that impacts the community. And I had a very good question come up, which is how did the 2010 water supply planning effort, what did it say? That was a 30-year plan. What did it say was going to be happening in 2020 as it relates to demands in the community? And I'm like, oh, I don't know. I have to go back and look. So I went back and looked, and it had projected that the community would be using 13,250 acre feet a year in 2020. And we currently are at just over 11,000. So we're using 2,000 acre feet a year less water than what our last planning effort had predicted. And a large part of that obviously was a product of a drought kind of recalibrating people's priorities when it comes to water. So I thought that was a fascinating kind of detail to come out of our last planning effort when we compared them.
Do we have the comment from the public, from Molly?
Yes.
Chair Keller, while we're waiting right there, I did have an earlier comment that echoes what Joshua just commented on. The long-term water supply plan 2011 to now, it's really 9 years ago, and how much has changed and how much we've learned. And now we're talking 2020 to 2050, you know, adaptive reuse all the way.
Adaptive management, we're gonna have to.
All
5
the way.
years.
Yeah. All right. So we have two questions in from Molly Troop. Why does the maximum environmental portfolio not include extraordinary conservation? Why is the max environmental so much more than the potable reuse one? Why does the maximum environmental portfolio not include extraordinary conservation? So extraordinary conservation it actually, the maximum environmental actually includes a larger, more robust conservation program. But what it's not doing is it's not getting us into having to ask the community for even more conservation. So it's kind of baked into that. Molly, I'd be happy to talk with you more offline about what that means, but the maximum environmental does include a larger effort in conservation. And you'll see in the bars that's actually when we expect a lower amount of annual water usage under the maximum environmental. And then the other question she had was, Portfolio 5, why does it not score high for protects and enhance habitats and wildlife? This is a great question and exactly what we're going to be tackling next Thursday. We're going to be getting into that balancing of what does it mean, like what if we put all of our weight on financial or all of our weight on environmental? How do the portfolios respond? So I'm hoping next Thursday you'll tune in and be part of that conversation as we kind of dig into and understand that weighting that will go on to kind of help us evaluate the different portfolios. Hopefully that answers her questions. Hopefully next week we can get her a mic.
Okay,
Yes,
Well,
we have one more person who would like to make a public comment.
yes, thank you.
Charles Hamilton, let me unmute you. Okay, you have 2 minutes to speak.
Chair Keller and Commissioners and Manager Hagman, I've never seen a presentation like this so comprehensive, so many variables. I'm impressed incredibly. I've been involved in water planning before. Back in the 80s, it's progressed in an amazing way. And that's been very encouraging because it's always frustrating to me in previous management situations to hear the lack of variables that were often left out in previous planning studies. Having said that, I probably have about a dozen questions, and I'm not going to try to formulate any of them right now because I literally need to spend more time with what you've done. Again, it's extremely encouraging. I'm so glad to see this type of basically scientific data work applied to something that in the past was, well, do we have water or not? No, maybe we do, maybe we don't. Well, how much will it cost? And that was it. You made your choice on something as simple as that type of a decision. So again, thank you. I'm looking forward to monitoring this some more.
Thank you very much for that comment. And yes, I think what this is an exercise is in science matters and we need to make use of it. So I think this has been a very useful exercise. I think we're at the end of our time and I thank everybody for staying around for so long and we'll be back in a week. Thank you very much and goodbye.